I just want to say hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jennifer Remenchik, and I am a member of the exhibitions team here at the Brand and creator and moderator of Art Talks at Brand, an initiative in which contemporary artists from the Glendale and greater Los Angeles area are invited to discuss their work and the issues that surround it, followed by a discussion with myself and a public Q&A. This program is free and open to the public. I would like to take a moment to thank the Brand Associates for their generous support of this program. Kira Maria Shewfelt is a painter based in Los Angeles, taking influence from literary genres of magical realism and romanticism. Her painting explores the physical-spiritual connections of contemporary life in saturated chroma, high-touch movement and gestures, and subjects that portray intimate, athletic, and existential motifs, often set within the natural world. Shewfelt cultivates a visual language equal parts personal and symbolic, engaging her imagery's open relationship to a shared and often communal narrative. She invites romance and fantasy into the work as politically inclusive gestures with a history of connecting self and other and reimagining stasis. Shewfelt's paintings are often about love. Her work can be found in the collection of AMOCA Wales and private collections internationally. So please help me welcome Kira. Yay!
When I was an undergrad, what I was interested in was writing and literature, and so that's where kind of a large part of my education and research developed. And I was particularly interested in linguistics and also literary theory, but like linguistics and the basic idea that language is a construction that we all agree to, that there's this huge gap between the experienced and the word we say and the visual form that word takes, and then like the associations we have in it, so that I could say cat and think of one thing and you would say cat and think of a totally different thing, and yet here is how we talk to each other like every day. That there's this like massive gap and leap of faith, nearly a spiritual leap of faith in communication. I wrote my thesis on, among others, René Magritte's Ça n'a pas un pipe. And I was really just interested in this idea of a symbol and how we arrive at a symbol that can contain so much, but also is shorthand. And continued to study art history and was interested in kind of ancient wisdom around that, including Mesoamerican and Egyptian hieroglyphics, Mesoamerican codices, and just a general interest in this type of form, like an awareness of the form. In literature, kind of along the same thread of thinking, the literature that interested me most was Magical Realism, which I still kind of credit as an influence, and that was something that was influential since, like, kind of in a cultural sense, from as long as I can remember. The idea that there's this like permeability between what happened and what was felt, and kind of the world around you, that like a tragedy could be washed away by 5 years of rain. That the world might cry and wash away this tragedy with 5 years of a flood, or that I have a couple images here, including Cortázar's from the observatory, but this kind of like cosmic sensibility that like that energy transfers from star to fish to an observatory in India that has never been seen, that there's this kind of connectedness in the world. And I also have, this is not just South American, but Southern American, like Toni Morrison and other authors that are kind of in the tradition of writing about families, even Faulkner, who's not a magical realist at all, but are kind of interested in these metaphors that are kind of knots to unpack. In graduate school, I loved art so much I wanted to get really close to it and was still kind of scared to take the leap and become an artist myself. So I studied graphics. I studied political graphics and was interested in this in a similar way, although it seems like a leap, like the knot of this image that somehow then creates an action, like that is so emotive and compressed that it could like inspire action from someone. And this, you know, I've got, I actually did a lot of work on studying the Obama campaign and various iterations of Obama, who was Cesar Chavez, who was Abraham Lincoln, who was Michael Jordan, who sort of transmuted into all these forms. Very interested in gesture in general and kind of these iconic images or processing of cultural events and history that that stay with us and that come to signify like a whole period of time. So this is kind of like the groundwork for what I came into making images with, much more of like a historical and literary and cultural sensibility for what images do in the world than necessarily an art historical one. So for me, these influences come into these motifs that I think I still use and have been using for a long time as inspiration. There's a lot of entities and players in love, romance, and femininity in my work. There's a lot of kind of awareness of influence and kind of a sense of a self that's permeable to influence. Another way of saying that is that there's a lot of relational dynamics in my work, or relationship dynamics in my work. I tend to be drawn to images that have a certain intimacy and vibration of intimacy around them. I've explored touch many different ways, both like in a formal sense and also like subject-wise, as this sort of sensory gateway to the unseen. And then I return to narrative and storytelling as this basis for a sort of an instinctual way of sharing the self. Narrativizing things, I think, is very instinctual. So when I have also studied a lot of art history, but I rarely look at art historical images as like direct references for my paintings, but I am really interested in paintings that are sort of have this like tension between the real and something kind of like pressed into it that is fantastical, mystical, emotional. I'm really drawn to a lot of European art that is about expression or making something that, like in the case of Monet, something became from like the model was made so that it could be painted and then it could be made, and this kind of feedback loop between the real and the imagined. Similarly, feel that way about surrealism and just gestures that feel really like kind of loose and connective. I also have this image of these little Colombian casitas on there because that's like a really classical artisanal gift from Colombia, and there's a sense of like things have to be nested, like the tiny people are in the tiny house and the or on the tiny bus, and there's a sense of like a place in the world that is really important, a kind of a magical place in the world that you might hold. And I'm really interested in bodies that kind of reveal their permeability or kind of nestedness in the world, decoration, movement. and instances where like so many people might feel called to move to like towards a certain cause or gather. What that looked like early on in my painting was a lot of kind of bodies that were like opening to the environment, and a lot of like beginning of experimentation with gesture, like kind of how can I be loose and a little bit connect with these figures that are known to me, but also become sort of characters as I render them. I was really interested in this kind of like metaphor, this knot of the metaphor, and how to position figures in a space where they might like be connected and like revealing something about themselves. In this case, like I was really interested in this like gesture of the hand that was the leaf, that was the fig leaf, and the hand and the cover and the touch, and this kind of like sexual tension, like what, how the body might move and how like symbols might kind of tense a space up and reveal a story, or like the beginning point of a story. I was also really interested in like crops and paintings that, were kind of, I think in the search for this sort of unseen something, or felt something, there was a lot of tension between like how much to reveal about an image for me, and I also now have a backlog of so much work that I'm really like, it's hard to choose how to frame that. I thought a lot about life and death and figures that were fantastical. Often thinking about touch very directly. This is a series of work that was this kind of cosmic basketball game that I imagined, that had high stakes, and I wanted to kind of explore like a tension of touch that wasn't like explicitly sexual, but was also highly physical, and learn a little bit more about like the kind of punctuation of color too. All of this work is sort of like dancing around figures that I know, figures that I'm making up, figures that are sort of like I start to sort of explore the space around the figures more and more as a space that also needs to be like felt and touched and have its own like emotional register. From the basketball players, I went to the injured parties from the basketball game that had injured parties that needed a rest. And kind of the worlds gradually became bigger and bigger around the figures, and the figures started to like kind of move away from like a certain amount of centrality. So the work that I've shown is kind of graduate school to 2020 is this kind of exploration with like the theatrics of like storytelling and romance and affect and awkwardness, and oftentimes trying to like pull at the string of this kind of desire for connection, but also from a very specific vantage point that is somewhat tighter and in the frame. And then what changed after that was this kind of pull towards like more and more space and more kind of like non-being entities having an important sort of spiritual vibration to them as well. I early on in my painting practice, I had this proposition of like, what would it mean to like touch, to like create a painting with love, or to like kind of love your painting. And it was like, a lot of like soft brush work and stuff like that. And this sort of became not so much about love, but like attention or care, like could everything have like a moment to itself, or like a, could everything in the space be tended to? And I started to kind of like pick up my brushwork around here and be really interested in kind of rapidity and an energetic movement around brushwork as well. I haven't talked about this yet, but there's like a real intense high key palette that's kind of, I've always been interested in color, but it's like cranked up around this time as well. It's hard for me. I think I've started to understand that like color was my best friend in terms of finding like a particular emotive space. Like in order to make this thing unseen seen, color was a big friend. Movement was a big friend. Color was a big friend because I was still operating in worlds that were like somewhat connected to the real experience. So there's a real sense of, I think a lot of this works, you know, sort of is like made around 2020, where there's like a lot of solitude in the world also. So there's like a real sense of community, but also not community. And kind of, like solitude and also like awareness of how interconnected we all are. And so then like the ocean or the mountains or these kind of wild, big natural spaces are stand-in for that collective, like congregation of bodies. This is a piece called Venus and Serena, a forest fire. It's kind of, again, a lot of games and like athletics, this kind of idea of like something high stakes and cosmic, but also really kind of human is interesting to me. And a lot of my, I think brushwork at that time was informed actually by my drawing practice. Just drawing in pastels, drawing in marker, drawing, kind of documenting and cataloging a lot. 2020 is this moment of time of like solitude and just documenting like anything that happened in the world for myself in marker and pencil, in anything that I could get a hold of kind of urgently, but also drawing is like kind of effortful to me. Like painting has a movement to it that's much more, it's kind of a gentler energy to it, and drawing to me has like a much more urgent, like immediate, but also like it's a harder edge. And I think I was trying really hard to kind of reconcile this like self in the world in a new way when like the stakes of what had previously been like only romantic became like, and like imagined became ever more real when the stakes were illness or like racial inequality or like massive violence in the world. Like how do you deal with like romance and self-reflection and protest and death and kind of these contexts that are far larger than you, and also the smallness of like the world at times when you're walking in the park and a leaf falls. Like how can we reconcile this? And so I recently have been, it took me back to painting myself a lot. I felt at that time, this is 2020 to 2022, kind of like a little bit unmoored. And I'm sort of interested to know like what, the pandemic and that period of time that was, I think, pretty largely unmooring in our culture did to people's practices as artists. I feel like there must be a lot of breaks and then returns, like pickup and returns. But for me, I kind of allowed for this like new directness that I had previously been avoiding in a way, a directness of like representing the self. and also like took these long times to create paintings that I hadn't taken before, like years to create paintings. One, there was no urgency to finish them, and two, there was something I didn't like totally understand about them either. So I feel like this painting, one, I never got to show this painting, and I liked it a lot. So this is its airtime. This is its exhibition. But this painting was a painting that took me like 3 years to make, and I just really was searching. I felt like it was the first time. I was always interested in the emotive image, but it was the first time that I was searching for like such specificity with emotion that it would take like a description, something more like a multiple sentence description of the emotion that wasn't so located in like romance or fear or, you know, kind of a single silo, because each of those things like opens this huge expanse below it. But, you know, I was interested in this tension of like peace and suspension and the kind of tenuousness of being at rest and also being in a precarious rest. And that figure became like, started as like kind of a cartoon, and then slowly morphed into a friend, and then another friend, and then my sister, and then me. And so there was a sense that like somehow I had been like avoiding the familiar, the most familiar, in kind of a search for the fantastical. And so that leads me to my last body of work that is probably the most direct that I've made in terms of representation ever, and like number, that kind of threads techniques and interests that I've been working on for a really long time, with this more kind of direct self-portraiture representation of like kind of the quotidian, the domestic, spaces that are a little bit less filled with like the immediacy of that magic of existence. But I'm really earnestly trying to fill or find the magic of that existence in them, or feeling it sometimes, but having to like remember that in a way. So this body of work was all organized around touch, and I thought of it as a haptic poem to nurture, that it was really thinking about touch in this highly associative way, that I could bounce between images that were very direct and personal, and images that were fantastical and totally fictional and cobbled and collaged together from experience. And that like the way that those associations touch was also interesting to me. Boundary, like the fact that touch is like such a cornerstone for desire, the fact that like when you kind of rub your palms together, this is like the closest that you get to experiencing what your like inner synaptic self is feeling. But also touch is it's like beautiful and close and very instinctual, but also can be like a boundary to trespass if like not tended to properly. And I was interested in all that tension. I started the show with a lot of drawings, and I also, I would be remiss in not saying that the show is made very much in response to meeting my husband and getting married and having a child like within, a year. And it was very fast, and there was a lot of navigation of space and individuality to kind of find commune as well. So, and I was a new mother, and I was really kind of working in this hyper instinctual way of like yeah, like, you know, working on instinct, working on feeling, not knowing exactly what to do, and you read all the books, but then, you know, there's this person who also instinctually knows what feels good to them, and just being very aware that, like, how bizarre that is, that we, like, enter this world highly aware of pleasure and discomfort, and instantly lean into what feels good. So there was a lot of me kind of like quickly documenting this with this like fast line, just cheap colored pencil line work. And I was interested in this kind of organization of a show that wasn't based on an image, because my interest isn't the image, it's the feeling. So how could I construct a show that wasn't, like, much as I really love that type of work, that it's like, I'm going to, you know, investigate just because I like flowers, like this floral motif, and then I'm going to like turn this floral motif over and over on its head, compositionally or color-wise, in these formal ways. I love those shows, but my mind doesn't work that way, in kind of like a medium-based, immediate, like play way, and it works more in this poetic fashion of kind of like one thing grazes the other in terms of thought. So I have this Maggie Nelson's Bluettes here, because I think she does that so beautifully, with her poem experimental writing piece on the color blue, and how it kind of like dovetails in and out of her life and history, and these kind of more structural associations. So I really focused heavily on like what felt good, what feels good to make. I think I feel like I've heard you talk about that as like a taboo thing to do. A lot of organic and natural spaces, a lot of adornment and florals. I really thought about moments of touch between people. I'm going to look at my notes here for a second. So focus on organic and also animal forms. This kind of sense that animals and we as mammals are actually like very wired to be haptic creatures, to like understand when someone is even looking at us across a room, that you feel something in that like instance, that it's, you know, there's a sense of like your body in the world that's like really innate to being alive. So a lot of organic and animal forms, a lot of entities that required caretaking. I was really interested in these moments of touch between one another, with hands, lips, and kind of nested bodies that were, you know, holding each other in some way. And I also was kind of playing with brushwork and just like layering of color and finding complexity of color wherever I could, or trying really hard to like think of this as like a surface that needed to be cared for as well. I wanted the surfaces to look very touched, even, yeah, more than necessary, maybe. And it kind of toggled between these like really kind of totally imagined scenes, or like references like Lohengrin, like the Wagner opera. This painting is about, it uses the palette of supernovas, and I was just interested in this kind of like friction where stars are born and die, and then also takes an image from Wagner's, like a photograph of some actors in Wagner's opera Lohengrin, which is about two figures who, like the main character is a prince that cannot be known. If his entity is known fully, like the love between this couple is like can't be anymore. There's sort of like a sense that like to like love one another, one needs to leave some space for the other. Like, I'm trying to think of, and now it's like, now that it's not a lover's discourse, but it's on the tip of my tongue. I think it's Rilke has this really beautiful piece also on kind of the space of love, the attention, the caretaking of the space between one and another in love. There's a lot of domestic scenes in this space, and these are kind of like, something I liked about this is that they were like movements made so readily and so repeatedly that there was no image that I was referencing to paint these paintings. They're all based on memory. Like, this isn't an instance where I'm painting with my daughter. This is one of like 50 instances that this is 50 instances in one of painting with my daughter on the kitchen floor. This is like 400 days of sleeping in a bed that was too small. I just really enjoyed this kind of like freedom, even though it seemingly felt more contained in some ways than other works, because it was really rooted in family and a specific space, oftentimes, like my apartment. And I was really proud of like the color particularity, specificity that I was able to find, even though it was so saturated and so strong. Like, there's so many layers or dapples of color on top of each other that I felt very secure in finding like a frequency that was very particular. This piece, I also titled all the pieces in these kind of like, previously I would title work in these really kind of like obtuse, they were like, the images were characters that were a little bit more removed from me, but then the titles were very personal, like from lyrics that I was, music that I was listening to, or books that I was reading. And this show became like kind of more of that symbolic register, like these very sort of like general language around something that was very specific to me. So this is the sanctuary. An earlier piece is called The Journey. This piece is called Team Building. And there's like a lot of detail in the work and kind of playfulness in the work that I, again, had fun with. And there's a couple, I'm going to finish up with a couple pieces that were not in the show, but that I loved. This piece, again, a posture taken like, countless times and remembered, kind of felt in the body. I like grouping works really close together. I have a relatively small studio for the size that I work in, and it's kind of like, it feels cozy and good for things to be together. And I love drawing so much. I draw on the back of all my pieces. I like this idea of like really trying to like, I miss them when they're gone. I really like the idea of trying to kind of tend to them while they're around, like care for them while they're around. So I just was gonna kind of, I guess, reiterate it's the thesis of where I'm at right now, which is like, image making is this search for expansive selves, but like selves that are free to grow and explore and evolve, but also selves that are nurturing a connection to others, that are very like tethered to other relationships, other entities in the world, and to the world itself. And I'm finding that this kind of looseness of fantasy or romance around that is really useful for me in trying to like navigate that complexity, to be a self that is highly individual and highly mutable, and also continue to like find that attachment. And I've even experimented with works where without the figure entirely, where there's a sense that like that the body isn't, if we're like really looking for an attachment beyond the body, that maybe the body is not entirely necessary to be represented. And this is stuff that I haven't shown a lot, but I'm playing with now. I think I'll end with that one. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. You guys made me feel comfy.
A little bit lighter, and they get pretty bright, so if it's too bright, you can just move forward or backward or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a little green to start with, they get more normal. So it's funny because one of the things that I had written down during your talk, you kind of addressed it in that like one slide that was like a thesis slide, which is I wrote down, do you ever think of your painting as a practice of self-definition? And I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit more.
Maybe. I mean, I haven't thought about it as self-definition so much, but I think there's like a common thing that, you know, like in a writing class is very much like write about what you know. And that like sometimes like a high degree of specificity or intimacy can be like a through line to a more universal feeling. So that's, I think, in these more kind of self-portrait based works, that's what I'm experimenting with. Although I love people who just make self-portraits forever and ever and ever. I find them fascinating. I can't say right now if that would be me.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So I have known Kira for a long time. I've also known a number of you for a long time as well. So, I would say that, you know, I've known you for maybe like almost a decade. Definitely a long number of years, right? And I'm thinking about like, and maybe I'm also projecting a little bit of myself too, but it's like when we were younger. I feel like you end up, you know, as a young person in LA, you spend a lot of time with yourself, especially when you're an artist, you know? And it's like, it's interesting, like, I don't know, sometimes when I spend a lot of time with myself, it's like I don't need to fight for my own time or my own whatever. We get older, we have more responsibilities, we have bigger jobs, bigger lives, bigger relationships, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a different thing. Then it's like, oh yeah, like segmenting little portions of time for yourself becomes like more of a thing, whereas like, I feel like a lot of time when I was younger, I was like, where are other people? Do you know what I mean? As opposed to like trying to carve out as much time for myself. I don't know if you relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I see that a little bit in the pattern of the way that the work has developed over the years, especially when you were talking about, you know, redefining yourself in, you know, a period of transition where you had like a lot of relationships developing.
Yeah, I think certainly it's harder to come by time. I think that, you know, this maybe like time is moving a little quicker and my paintings are moving a little slower, and that's the balance of where it hangs. But I think there's some exploration of like medium in particular that's really exciting to me right now, that is maybe more of like the like thread that I'm pulling at.
Yeah, and you also mentioned a little bit, because we've talked about this before, like enjoying what you do in the studio, like just enjoying your practice. And I also was, I was thinking about this when you were talking, like what is it you like most about the actual action of painting? Do you enjoy it? Like just, you know what I mean? The actual action of it, like the physicality of it, or like the process.
Yeah, I love the physicality of painting.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense to me to like move in such a way that actually feels good to the touch, and that like is something very particular to you, that might be more indicative of gesture than anything. Like pleasure might be like where gesture comes from or originates. But yeah, I love the physicality of painting, and I think that there's something in movement in general that is like energetic, again, kind of outside the visible.
Yeah, it's almost like a somatic healing or something like that, that hopefully you can see from painter to viewer, or gets transmitted in some kind of way.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about, there's a delicate balance in your work between revealing and concealing, right? So like, I feel like you give a lot of vulnerability in your practice, especially like, romantic moments. Sometimes they're seem more like fantastical, or like not necessarily, they're like personal but not actually of you.
Yeah.
And other times they're really personal. But there are also movements of like, you can see this, it's vulnerable, but you don't see that. You know what I mean? Like, especially sometimes in cropping, or like, I was just wondering how you make those decisions. Do you think about like, I want to show this, but I don't want to show that, because that might be too much or not enough, or like, how much do you think about those things when you're painting the work?
I really like that question. I think there's probably just a like kind of instinctual like desire to conceal a little bit more when it's like more direct, some of that is like, like I'm thinking about like a painting of like a nude cutting my hair. It's kind of like, there's sort of like moments of, like kind of, I don't know, some sort of like moment of like tension in that like intimacy or modesty or something like that. I don't know, to me, like that's indicative of like that space for me, that if it's like, if it was like more, if there are like moments where more would be revealed might be like a different frequency of emotion. More revealed is like ecstatic, or about freedom or exposure or play in a way, and this show was more about navigating kind of the space of like pleasure and caretaking and boundary, in that way, like what's not revealed is that line.
When you said that, I was thinking also about those kiss paintings you did, and talking about that performance. What's the performance? Marina
and Ule.
Yeah. Also, I was thinking a lot, and this is actually maybe in some ways more of a comment, but I like the way you talk a lot about your influences, not just in painting, not just like by other painters, painting influenced by painting, but you do seem to be very influenced by stories in particular, right? Like performance, it's not quite a story, but it's theatrical in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or like Wagner, or like, you mentioned a lot of literary references. I actually don't have anything to say about that, but I just kind of noticed it.
Yeah.
But I also, I guess thinking about influence, you talked a lot about like fantasy and influence, and you also mentioned surrealism, and I was thinking about how surrealism is, like when I think about surrealism, I think a lot about dreams, and oh man, I didn't turn this on. I did the same thing at another one. I'm sorry, Ellen. But when I think of dreams and introspection, I mean, obviously dreams are influenced by the world, and there's a lot of like permeability in that kind of stuff, but I was wondering how you parse out that internal, external, you know what I mean? Which seems to be a lot of like the thesis of your work, but that sort of like internal dream, like my own fantasies, right? Or your own fantasies. And then the external influence of like, your fantasies melding with like a performance piece, melding with your family life. You know what I mean? I'm just wondering about like if you can elaborate a little bit more about how those things kind of like marinate together. Or what point do you feel them the most? Or
I mean, very organically.
Yeah.
I think like most people, there's sort of like a head, heart, you know, like what you read, what you ingest is all kind of around you. And so there's not a lot of boundary there in terms of influence. You know, I think that there's like kind of having an awareness of traditions of storytelling, traditions of like academic disciplines and painting and just generations of people, like being connected to generations of people knowing their stories, like all of us are, but kind of having that type of culture that keeps that memory and storytelling part of like your own familial life alive. There's just kind of a sense that like you are the sum of everyone you know, you know, and everything you've learned, and so there's not a sense of restriction there for me. But I do, yeah, I think probably lean more towards references or interests that are like outside of the painting world, because I find that they're like tend to be more conceptual oftentimes for me, or like they trigger a more conceptual response for me, which is like that they connect with this like idea of the like concept of emotion that then I can make physical, but I can, maybe don't like reverse engineer that exactly from painting. I remember like for like it took me a long time to find a painting that I like, you know, we've all like cried over songs and things like that were like important to us, but it took me a really long time to find a painting that I got like teary over, and it was an Egon Schiele retrospective, and just seeing like all of these bodies over and over and over again, kind of like with this like thin line and wrapped around each other. I was like, I finally did it. I burst into tears about a painting, you know. But like I find that a like particular challenge. You know, I think we're really saturated with imagery.
Sure.
And we're not quite as like it's hard, you know, like when it comes to music or movement, like it gets in the body faster. Dance, you know, there even storytelling from like a you know, if you're reading, it's like activating like an imaginative part of like image making. I think we're drawn as people to images so much that it's hard to connect them to this like spiritual and emotional side of oneself. And so yeah, when I find that, I take notice.
So when you like see, or when you hear about a story, for instance, that you like, you said the word intellectual, that it's like a conceptual, like something hits. I mean, I'm assuming, right? So does it go in like you experience the thing, it's like translated as a thought, that kind of gets translated as a feeling? Or do you even think of it that way? Or like, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens much more instinctually than that, even though it's based on concept, but like it's, you know, it's like why we cry at movies and why we, you know, kind of, like, I don't know why something hits when it hits, but it's usually connected to a thread that's like, maybe it's like at the forefront of your mind because you're experiencing something in parallel to that. Right, like it's very temporally based, but it's also like connective of many times at once.
Well, I think that's a good place to maybe open it up. If anybody else has some questions. Ooh,
yeah,
there we go.
Thanks, Justin.
I wanted to know the process of putting the figures in, when they come in, when they leave, the things around them, because it doesn't, it feels, yeah, I just want to know the process of that.
I think it's really relative to the image. The figures, they evolve in the paintings quite a bit sometimes. Like, they evolve quite a bit, and other times they come out, you know, I'm like more specific about clothing and hairstyle and things like that that like come out quickly, but I'm still will fuss with like a gesture or an expression, especially in these small ones that are kind of cartooned. I think a lot of them, the figures are placed early on, but you know, like I don't know, there's like a fire on the mountain. Like the reason that was a 3-year painting is because like that little tiny horse guy didn't come in until the end. You know, there was something like to activate it, and that's been. I think losing the figure has been exciting, and I think placing the figure like after some time has been really exciting as part of like the painting arc, the making of a painting. I would say I tend to be more like character driven, so those tend to start first. But the works that I've made that have like a seeming openness to like placement are maybe more like exciting. They're like wins.
Ooh, yay.
Hi. I was curious, I took so many notes while looking through my notes for a second. But towards the end you kind of shared about like maybe the body not being necessary and like new kind of figures that you're being drawn to. And a lot of that has been animals and mammals and just the colors that you've been choosing. I'm curious if you're noticing go through mine right now for that work, or like what the symbolism of those things are.
The work without figures. That work started because I was painting with my daughter, who like in a carrier, and like I really wanted to get back to it, and she was so young that I could give her something and she was going to put it in her mouth yet. She would just kind of hold like the paintbrush, and then it would distract her for a little bit, and she would make these like amazing marks where it would be like, you know, kind of like this like quick jagged, like just really resistance-based gestures. And so like the body was there but not there. You know, my body was there, her body was there. There was this relational kind of movement around that work. The relationship was there as well as the two bodies, but they didn't have to be represented anymore because they were around. I know there's a huge tradition of that in abstract painting that I sort of like could not have been interested in to engage until now. I'm not done with the figures entirely. I just am too attached to like the idea of this like nested vessel, like things being nested in each other. And even in those works, like I recalled like pollinators and butterflies, and was just thinking about like that even what you don't see, there's friction in what you don't see. Like we're still living in a particulate world that is like, you know, like active and energetic and full of like molecular structures. So like, but I was really excited about that kind of like the piqued interest of like the body being there and like evidenced by these gestures. Yeah.
Stand up so you can hear me. Coming from like an artist to an artist, like I know when you're in the studio, you shut the door and then your works like science, right? Like so in that sense, like changing and morphing that on where they listen to music in the studio. But could you walk me through like what it is when you shut that door? You've got your palette mixed up, some of the thoughts going on in your head, like as you're going through, it's like the music playing. Like, does that make sense?
He's setting me up because because I'm like one of those like psychos who plays the same song 80 times. It's set tink tink one, and then that is the mood. But I'm really interested in mood, and it's like very hard for me to listen to varying sounds, and also it's very hard for me to paint in silence, and it's also very hard to listen to like varying sounds, like a soundtrack or some sort of like more stories as I'm trying to like tap into my own story and like energetic frequency that I'm trying to like export. So it is, you know, when I'm alone, it's loud, but if I'm around anyone, it's with the earbuds in. Yeah, listening to everything on repeat. And it can range greatly in terms of music, but folk or, you know, reggaeton or whatever. But it will stay with that, you know, and then I have to go back there to kind of, I don't know, move in a certain way, feel a certain way.
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting too, because I feel like a song is often a story, but it leaves you with a particular feeling. You know what I mean? And I would kind of think in some ways of your paintings as like that. Like, I was going to ask you before, but I didn't want to take up too much time, but like that it's interesting to me, the fact that you can sometimes begin with something that seems a little more narrative or story-like, but often what gets translated, at least to me, is a feeling, not a story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it kind of makes sense, because that is usually, I mean, I'm not like this because I'm like very verbally cued, so I remember lyrics really quickly, but lots of people will hear a song a million times and not know the lyrics, but you kind of get that a feeling of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it kind of makes sense, because that does feel a lot like your paintings, where it's like the feeling of a story or a song.
Yeah, I didn't mention this, but one of like the great tragedies of how many like works of fiction that I've read is that I don't remember plots ever.
Right.
I actually just remember these kind of crystallized, you know, from like Song of Solomon that I had posted there. It's like a scene with 3 generations of women eating peaches that like is the kind of signifier for that book for me, or the flood, or you know, I'm trying to think of another like image that comes to mind really quickly. But there, it's a kind of yeah, an interesting kind of like translation of like a crystallized imagery as a stand-in for a narrative that is actually more like nested in a human experience or feeling, and that is like the feedback loop there. And for some reason story like remains, it's narrative painting, but it's kind of anti-narrative painting, right?
Oh,
Like
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
There's narrative, it's narrative painting, but it's anti-narrative in that like the resulting sequence of events is not as important as like the emotive core.
Sure. I mean, we could get into a whole segue about the politics of like narrative versus non-narrative painting, and like modernism, and like, you know what I mean? The medium is that whatever.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, but I'm sorry, I just, your daughter was being cute, so I couldn't, it wasn't totally, it was like, oh. But thank you again, Kira. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
and
guys.
thank you all for coming. Also, you can't check it out now, but y'all should come back here for Blended Worlds, which is a part of PST. It is going to be a pretty interesting exhibition, and it's done with JPL. So Jet Propulsion Laboratory has gotten all scienced up in the other room, and it'll be opening this Saturday. There's also going to be more art talks, and thank you again, Kira, for offering your presentation to us.
Thanks.